All right, so let's start now. The third session is about education. So the session title is Successful Course Delivery During the Pandemic. You know, over the past 3 years, we struggled a lot, not only for just the mobility, but also our regular work, the way we work, where we work, and for our education is the same thing. So that's why the CUTC Executive Committee put together this session, try to share experience and also do some brainstorming about our current education and the future education under the impact of a pandemic. So we're supposed to get Shauna Hallmark to moderate the session, but she's now in Greece. We have two panelists, Larry and Lily. They're also remote. They cannot come because of some reason. So we have 4 speakers for today. For the technical reason, we want to adjust the order. We want the 2 on-site persons to speak first, and then the 2 remote persons. Okay, so after these people share about their experience of a successful course delivery, we want to open up for questions. So now I would like to introduce our first speaker, Ali Maher. He's a professor at Rutgers University and also director for the Region 2 UTC Center for Advanced Infrastructure and Transportation. Ali, now the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I thought before I start, if I may ask, how many of us here have had teaching duties the last 2 years? Good. So a good number of us here have been at the forefront of dealing with the challenges and impacts of COVID in the classroom, interacting with students, and also working at the same time on our research projects and interacting with graduate students and so on. So I'm hoping out of the discussion today, we can learn a little bit about each other's know-how, experience, and share some of those ideas. Successful delivery to me is a little bit of stretch here. It's mostly delivery of courses. So what I'm trying to do today a little bit, talk about 2 studies that we did at our university at Rutgers in the spring of 2021 and fall of 2021. Essentially, these 2 studies were done by the Center for Teaching Advancement and Assessment at Rutgers to look into the impact and the response of our faculty and students to the disruptions due to the pandemic. The first study, and the reason I want to do this is because this provides a framework. In fact, some of the findings here probably are going to be common with your own experience. And hopefully at the end of this session, at least we can agree on a few lessons learned and hopefully apply them as we move forward with dealing with the impact of the pandemic. The first study, spring 2021, roughly 2,000 instructors were engaged, about 38,000 students. And the follow-up study, fall of 2021, which really was at the peak of the pandemic, we had roughly about 1,500 instructors and 42,000 students engaged. And the kinds of questions that were asked from students and instructors, these are some samples of those questions. For example, to the instructors, we were asking them about the method for engaging students in the classroom and how they were, working with digital technologies in delivering their courses, how the undergraduate students in particular, were receptive of those delivery mechanisms and they were engaged, and whether or not the instructors took advantage of pedagogical trainings that the university was providing for them. We also wanted to know if they have any suggestion on the kinds of training for teachers and for professors and TAs and adjunct professors that would be engaged. For the students, what the study did, it added a few questions to the annual survey that the students have to essentially have to do as a part of their class surveys. And the questions were typically the content, about the content and level of the course, or whether or not the workload was manageable. Was the site for the course useful for them? Could they access things easily? And also whether or not the instruction that they received for assignments, exams, quizzes, and other course activities, whether they were clear, comprehensible, and so on. So these were some of the questions, and I briefly will go over the major findings. So in spring of 2021, peak of pandemic, things are pretty, fluid, a lot of confusion. From the point of view of instructors and those also who were teaching large undergraduate courses, they were not convinced that the students were engaged at all. They were having doubt about whether or not the students were really participating in interactions online and so on. However, at the end of the survey, they were also saying that at least the sentiment was such that if we continue with offering courses online, then the students who opt to take these courses online in the future terms, then they will be better equipped to deal with the technologies and delivery methods involved. The same thing also was true about the professors. In spring of 2021, it was interesting that only 40 instructors out of thousands of instructors at my university, they went above and beyond improving their course content and making it workable with these online delivery mechanisms. And none of them were compensated either. So that was a challenge and an issue. The other major conclusions from spring of 2021, the first survey, a lot of instructors were exhausted. They were just, at the end of their wits, if you will. On the other hand, many of them also expressed the sentiment that they have gained quite a bit of knowledge about dealing with these online delivery mechanisms. Many of them also indicated that they would continue using online teaching, especially for graduate courses. So for graduate courses, this was a sentiment that was presented in spring of 2021. Now, the follow-up survey that was done 9 months after the first one, which was for fall of 2021, the results of this study came out beginning of this year, in January of 2022. So these were some of the gist of what we learned from this survey. The most pressing issues that that were faced by the instructors and students essentially were shifted from the technology aspects. So they were becoming more and more familiar and savvy about using delivery mechanisms online. There was minimal concerns about failures, so failures of connectivity and so on. But at the same time, a lot of instructors expressed their concerns about students, especially undergraduate student engagement. So that was still is an issue that we are facing. As I mentioned before, the greatest challenge is for undergraduate engagement, and also a lot of professors were concerned about chasing after students, making sure they can submit their work, their homeworks, exams, and so on. At the same time, the professors report that most students are meeting the course learning goals and also the requirements far better than what they did the previous semester. So while at the same time, many of these issues have improved from 21, spring to fall of 21, there was this sentiment again among the educators that the upper administration should work closely with the professors and with the teachers to equip them and work with them. So pedagogical support is important. A lot of encouragement is being given to faculty to utilize them. At the same time, the TAs and part-time instructors were not taking advantage of these pedagogical tools. So there has to be an emphasis on getting TAs and adjunct professors engaged in these types of trainings. Finally, a few, I would say, overall conclusions were that the challenges, the instructors, indicated that they are not happy still about wearing masks in classrooms. I was teaching a large undergraduate classroom, 91 students, and I had to do it synchronously wearing a shield because some students had to read lips because of hearing issues. So imagine you are doing on the screen synchronously through Zoom with a shield, and it was a little bit complicated. And professors also indicated that the pandemic challenges and mental health of students remains to be a major concern. And finally, another issue that they raised was that for the students dealing with these new flexible course offerings and policies and so on, the hybrid teaching versus in-person online is still confusing and still causing concerns. That's it. That's pretty much in a nutshell what the results were out of these two studies. But again, the landscape is fairly vague and fairly fluid, and things are evolving. It's a sort of an evolving situation. And I would personally like to learn more about what you have experienced and, whether we can come up with a conclusion at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Adi. Our next speaker is Professor Steve Mensch. Steve is a good friend of mine. So we both work at the University of Washington. He's also a PI of the Pac-Trans Center before. So Steve just received the College of Engineering's Education Award. So when I put together this workshop, I thought that's a perfect time for Steve to share his experience. He's also heading our undergraduate education committee. Steve, now it's your show.
Thanks, Inhai. All right. Before I get started here and click through some slides, maybe I should give you just a little bit of background on my perspective. So I'm kind of thinking we need to think about whether we're talking about teaching online or teaching during the pandemic, which I think can be two separate issues. I've been teaching online courses at the University of Washington for 20 years. We have an online master's in civil engineering program that is 20 years old, and I've been teaching since the beginning there. So, when it comes to students who are motivated to learn online and all that kind of stuff, I've seen all that, and I've heard, 20 years ago, all the arguments for, why you can't or why it's difficult or why it's hard, but it's managed to be quite successful. So I'll give you just maybe a few pieces of information or my perspective, basically. So first of all, if you want to see what happened at the University of Washington, this is our pandemic teaching timeline. So March of 2020, we went online with pretty much a day's notice. That was difficult for some, easier for others. And then we started in September of that year, and we did basically a full year of online remote teaching, right? All of academic year 2021 was online. We came back September of this last year in person. And then in January, we went to what I'll call a hybrid, right? Omicron was really big. And so, right before we came back from Christmas break, we were told, hey, you can teach either in person or online, but if you teach in person, you have to accommodate any online student. So that was an interesting twist. But then since then, we're back in person. So That's our 2-year odyssey at the University of Washington. Let's go forward. The laser pointer works. Nothing else does. You can just advance it manually. That'd work too. There's only a few slides. Now might not be the right time to say that my wife works for Microsoft. She's in cloud computing, so maybe not in PowerPoint, so that's cool. Thank you. These are just a few of my thoughts. So online teaching tools, and this comes from teaching online for 20 years and also for the last couple of years online and in person. So some things I think that are required. A state-of-the-art learning management system. You can't show up to an online course with a bunch of papers in a folder and pass things out and hope things are going to go okay. Right? Your students want to see the whole course immediately, the beginning of day one, the entire course, everything posted, everything ready to go. That's a shock for some folks, but you can quickly adapt. So some kind of online meeting software, we're all familiar with that kind of stuff. I would say a quality headset and microphone. So no teaching from the microphone on your computer or anything else like that. I've got a teenage boy, so we have some pretty good gamer headsets. So I have a cordless gamer headset. It looks a little dorky, but the sound is crystal clear and I can hear everything. And I've done enough webinars with webinar managers that will tell you, don't you show up using the microphone on your laptop. I'll want to see a headset. But and I say a quality headset probably run you more than $100. If you're spending $30 on a headset, it sucks. And high-speed connectivity. I'd say probably a megabit per second to teach and maybe 150K to listen. And you can turn on and off video and that kind of stuff. What I would call convenient for our courses, some sort of lecture recording, premium lecture recording service. So you can record stuff on Zoom, but it's sort of limited in what it can do. But something like Panopto does all sorts of cool stuff. You can download things for podcasts. Students can listen to you at 1.5 or 2x speed. If you're really boring, they can go really fast through your lecture in their own time. They really like that. Or they can rewind and look at your stuff again. Some cloud-based sharing or editing tool. And I say, generally, you don't want to run your course on Google Sheets, but it's useful for collaborative work that you do online, things like that. And then some sort of video capture or storage mechanism, right? You need a camera, and the storage mechanism helps too. Like I spun up my own YouTube site where I basically put a bunch of my own videos. My kids think that's the dumbest thing ever. Like, what do you got, like 12 likes? Actually, one of them I accidentally made public and has a couple thousand views. And I'm like, all right, how about that? Okay, so this, I'll show you just briefly what one of our professors did. This is Julian Yamaura. He teaches a junior level construction materials course, which you can imagine works a little bit different online than it does in person.
But we were told that all of spring quarter was going to be virtual or all online. All of us got together and maybe thought, what do you guys think that we can do to make it more interactive? We slowly started to come up with this idea of videotaping ourselves, doing all these different activities. Okay, hi everybody, thanks for joining. This is just a typical action camera, and I use this as my primary video source. Down into this basement area of this quarter right now, I'm teaching 2 courses. One of them is a construction materials course, and it's got a major lab portion. What I'm doing today here is just making concrete so the students can watch me make concrete. There's 4 different materials, actually 5 including air. Students are at home, and I just wanted them to see what each of these ingredients look like. 3/4 inch nominal maximum aggregate size. And then I give them the values and the data from all this activity, and they can write lab reports and do some analysis with that. So they're little mini modules, if you will, and I'm a big fan of keeping things about 10 to 15 minutes. If you've ever made a sandcastle, you've done something very similar. Getting this whole online system is a little bit challenging, but I'm actually starting to like it quite a bit. I've spent quite a bit of time on YouTube looking through all these different content, and what gets my attention? What's entertaining to me? Wow, you see that? So I probably put a little too much water. And I'm hoping by us, just being our personality and showing them certain procedures to have that the practical side of everything that they're learning kind of click with them as they do these lab sessions. We're trying to make it as interactive as possible with the technology that we have. That's it.
Yeah, he crushed that course, by the way. Amazing. So some lessons learned or maybe already known. You might know these. So what's necessary for success? So like I said earlier, an organized and fully ready learning management system course website from day one. No fair building your course as the course goes along. No fair showing them 1 week at a time because you're afraid they're going to look ahead. That's ridiculous. They want to see the whole thing. And this comes from just teaching online the last 20 years. They want to see it. Active content to force engagement, right? So we talked about maybe worrying a little bit about student engagement. So developing something useful or active to help force that engagement. It really doesn't take much. They really do want to talk and speak. Good and repetitive communications with students, right? It's a little bit more difficult when you don't have a bunch of students sitting in front of you every other day to get the information out, and you have to go investigate different channels, online, in person, discussion boards, video, whatever, to get information to students. And I think what, Ali, what you mentioned earlier, active check-ins with students, right? And like we kind of view this as something new or different, but like I said, I've got a student in middle school and a kid in high school, and ask those teachers what they do with those students to make sure that they're successful. They're actively checking in with those students all the time. I think it's something that we probably ought to do at the college level anyway. I mean, there are other models that suggest we just teach, and if you're there, you're there, and if you're not, you're not, and it's your problem. And I think those days are gone. And then students, what do they like? They like breaks. Duh. Sometimes when you're teaching online, you forget about the break. You're teaching synchronously online, you forget about the break things. They want to get to know you and others online, and that's really difficult unless you allow time and space for that. And there are ways to do that, right? There are ways to do that in small groups. There are ways to do that in breakout rooms. There are ways to do that in discussion boards and other things. And then they like, I think, active non-desk or computer assignments. So I took, maybe I was one of those 40 instructors, but I took the time to totally rework every course that I taught. And my idea was to rework it so it worked when we taught it in person as well. And I got rid of a lot of things that I thought sucked. So for instance, I got rid of midterms and finals. They're terrible. Nobody likes them. Nobody learns anything from them. And the students, and it's a high stress situation, and it basically rewards folks who are good at school and not good, and maybe it penalizes students who are good at other things, but maybe not taking exams. And the active non-desk assignments, so just getting them outside for field trips, just little personal field trips in their neighborhood to look up things and see things. They really, really like that more than I thought they would. So here's an example of a totally tricked out Canvas website. Each day or each week, there's an overview, the learning objectives for the week, how we're going to use the class time, what the required media is, the recorded lectures, all of that's available in advance so they can see that. So if they got to skip out on a day for whatever reason, bang, they can pick it up right here. They don't even have to ask. They don't need any special permission. It's all right there. So on and so forth, including videos recorded in advance. So I'll end with this idea. Making a blueberry lemon citrus shrub, because who wants to make lemonade anymore? Out of lemons, right? The pandemic pushed us forward, I think, about 10 years in online learning in about a year. So what do we do with these new skills? And I'll offer just one piece of information: hybrid learning. So integrating online and in-person learning in the same class. There's no reason that we can't do that. Most of us probably did that at some point already. And I don't think we're going back. There's no going back to, hey, all my students are in class all the time and they're in front of me. Sure, you can force them to come into your classroom and you could not offer anything else, but that's kind of a lousy way of going, isn't it? So I think this hybrid way is the way we're going to see happening more and more. And I'll give you this one little piece of information here. We asked our students, our civil and environmental engineering students, for hybrid courses, What did you like about the online part, or being able to not attend class for a couple of days and not fall behind or anything like that? And they told us what you think they would tell us, right? It's better for my schedule. I can learn better. It's better for my mental health, less commute time, better and more time to work a job or the family, or the course was too early or late to fit my sleep schedule. We all know that, right? And so we talk about students not attending, and we're worried that they're not attending class live. But I will tell you, if I look at the last couple of faculty events that Inhai and I attended, I could tell you that the faculty are in the same exact boat. They're not attending at the same rate. Heck, we canceled a triple retirement ceremony due to lack of interest. How about that? So we're all kind of in the same boat here, but I think we can pick up from this, and we can learn from this. And I can tell you later on about some of the hybrid stuff that we're trying to do at UW and do an online version of our Bachelor of Civil Engineering degree. Thanks, appreciate your time.
Thank you, Steve. Our third speaker is Lily. Maybe most of us know Lily pretty well. Lily Riado. She was a past president of CUTC, and she is currently professor at University of Florida and director of the Florida Transportation Institute and the Region 4 UTC. Lily cannot join us in person today. She is joining online and is going to deliver her talk and participate in the discussion online. So Tracy, if Lily is ready, let's start. All right, Lily, start.
Sharing my presentation. I hope you can see it.
Yes.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you for the invite and accommodating the hybrid format. I want to talk first about what it is that we teach, because there's a variety of offerings that we have, and so we addressed each one kind of separately, and some because of the requirements, but some because we chose to do so. So what do we teach? So we've had the online graduate program, and I've had personal experience with that. I've been teaching a class that has online students as well as in-person students. So this is kind of the universe I'm going to talk about. So how we handled the pandemic, and that's been different to a large degree because of state requirements. The state of Florida, the requirement was the university has to have a certain percent of classes that are going to be in person. So the university had to comply with that. And what our college and many colleges at UF did is there were certain courses that continued in person, and those for us were the laboratory courses. So those continued in person with masks. The remaining classes, there was a mixture. Some were hybrid, so students had the option of attending in person or remotely. But the majority, especially at the graduate level, were online. So for the professional courses, the vast majority were converted to online delivery. So there was no in-person anymore, and that actually changed the dynamic, because a lot of people wouldn't previously attend training. They started to attend training because it was now available online. The K through 12 activities were all canceled across the consortium. I don't think we had any activities for about a year, maybe longer. The online graduate program now, because there were so many more courses that were taught online, that program expanded significantly because a lot of our courses were online anyway. So what went well? I would say from discussions with colleagues, the availability of Zoom, it was so easy to have calls with faculty, for TAs to meet with students, to share documents, to collaborate online, for lectures as well as for research type meetings. Everybody has enjoyed that, and we continue to enjoy that. Sometimes we joke that we are in adjacent offices, but it's still more convenient for all of us to be on Zoom and look at a document and work on it together. So the availability of those tools has made some of the collaborations much easier. The same, I would say, beyond the teaching, with collaborators across the country, to have that capability and to be able to do that has helped tremendously with research and with education and communication with students. The second thing that has gone well was the opportunity to have external presenters in our classes. I had several people who otherwise would have been so much harder to bring in, travel, it's difficult, the time it takes, but if you invite someone for a lecture and the class is online anyway, it becomes so much easier to do that. So we had several presenters who we otherwise wouldn't be able to hear from. The third thing that I heard actually from students a lot was they liked having the classes recorded, and that many of them said, well, I really wanted to go back and understand this a little bit better. So having the recording, they really appreciated that. The fourth thing is the expansion of online programs. A lot of people around the state were now able to attend classes, to join the EDGE program. And I think as a result of the pandemic and this expansion, we started a transportation master's degree for professionals in collaboration with the Florida Department of Transportation. They were interested in providing transportation professionals, people who work within the agency, consultants, and so on, with an opportunity to learn about transportation, but in a broader perspective. So Florida policy and things like that. So this kind of opened the door for this type of an activity. So that's what went well. Now, what didn't go well, and we've heard from others as well, I think that is, you hear it all the time, the student participation sharply declined. So for courses that were hybrid, the number of students who actually went to class went down significantly. In some cases, I know lectures were being canceled when they were planned to be in person because there were no students. And so what's the point of delivering a lecture when you already have it recorded? So the participation declined, has declined. There's less engagement and so on. Increase in mental health issues across the board. I would say it's a significant issue with students feeling isolated, not being able to engage. Same actually, I would say with young faculty starting out their careers when they haven't had a chance to build their network yet, that becomes very difficult. Another issue with some of our students, especially from rural areas, is low connectivity, no solid internet. So I personally had a couple of students who were in areas where their internet wouldn't work, and they had to drive somewhere far away to be able to access the class and to be there in person. And so as a result, they weren't attending as regularly. Generally, from after we started opening up, it's clear that students are starved for this interaction with their peers, with the transportation professionals. So every event we've had, I hear from students, oh, this was great. It was so nice to finally interact with other students, with building their networks and so on. So that's my list of what I see didn't go as well. And just some thoughts about the future. I would say number one, the way we're headed, internet must be everywhere. It has to be 100% reliable. Otherwise, people will be left behind. And I know that there are, you know, for example, rural areas that don't have the same type of connectivity, and that puts them at a clear disadvantage. The second thing is this hybrid mode. We have to make our courses more interactive, more real world type of activities, group activities, interactions with professionals, a better connection with the real world. It's the typical type of lecture we may have experienced ourselves. It's just not going to work. But we have a great opportunity to use this hybrid mode online to continue with some of these activities, the recordings, like I said, inviting visitors, having online class activities in groups. Zoom has this great feature where you can put students in groups, and they can work in their groups, and then you can bring them back. So it's such a great tool that we can take advantage of it and make it much more interesting for students. And I don't see any other path forward. We have to make it interesting for students to be able to be engaged in this new world. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Yinhai. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lily. I know it's not easy, and we got a very good, understanding of your experience. So now is our last speaker, is Larry Relic. I bet you all know Larry pretty well. He's the current president of CUTC. Larry is a professor at Auburn University and director of the Auburn University Transportation Research Institute. Larry is ready. Okay, Larry, start. Thank you.
I'm assuming you can all see my screen. So I'm going to be talking about successful course delivery during the pandemic. The irony of having COVID during this presentation is not lost on me. I think we've all had challenges, and this is actually just par for the course. By way of overview, I'm going to take a bit of a broader view. I'm going to look at our education and outreach initiatives, mainly because I knew I was going to be fourth on this panel, and I knew that anything I would say would be a repeat of what others have said, and that would have been true. The other thing you'll notice is I'm going to talk about two universities because I moved in the middle of the pandemic. So I'm going to talk about the lessons from UNL and the Mid-America Transportation Center, as well as from Auburn University Transportation Research. So first thing I talk about is our after-school program at the Mid-America Transportation Center. It's a K-12 STEM program with an emphasis on middle school. The goal is to get the students interested in STEM, trying to get them to not drop math and science when they get to high school, because that's one of our biggest challenges. We focused very heavily on schools that had high federal school lunch programs. The clubs meet weekly. They're led by engineering undergraduate students and hosted by teachers. So they're in person with a lot of on-hand experience. The spring of 2020, we went partial. Essentially, we started and then the pandemic hit and we had to shut everything down because every school prevented anyone from outside the school from coming in. In fact, they all went virtual. In the summer 2020, almost everything was canceled and we were canceled as well. In fall 2020 and spring 2021, we went hybrid, which meant that we were working with the teachers. We were trying to provide information to the teachers, but we were not allowed in the schools for the most part. So it was very difficult. It was particularly difficult on the Native American reservations that we worked with, the schools on those in those areas, because not only were we not allowed in schools, we were not allowed into the tribal area. So just even delivering resources was a challenge. And then back in summer 2021, and from then on, we're back in person. Here's a picture. You can see we still have to follow safety protocols. The kids are in masks, the instructors are in masks, but we are back online in person. Lessons learned, definitely the hybrid program was less popular with the students participants. We found a very hard challenge of getting the students involved as well as the teachers, and we probably lost during the height of the pandemic about 50% of our participants, both schools and students. The longer term issue was a loss of relationships with the school and staff due to turnover and changes in programs. We're slowly building that back up. The positive, we had a revision of curriculum, include new topics, also culturally significant STEM lessons and activities, particularly related to Native Americans. So we took an opportunity to expand our offerings. We revised the in-person format. And we also learned that we could have greater autonomy at certain schools. Because we weren't allowed into the schools, we actually had more emphasis on having the teachers run the program rather than ourselves. Another program that we ran through the pandemic was our MATC Scholars Program. It's really designed for two groups. One is to get undergraduate students interested in going into grad school, particularly those from underrepresented groups. The second one was a tribal college scholars program, where it was to get students from tribal colleges, two-year colleges, interested in going to four-year colleges. So it's a multi-day program. Always been up till the pandemic was held in person. A lot of intensive sessions, a lot of one-on-one mentoring, a lot of networking opportunities. In 2020, we postponed it for obvious reasons. We're in the middle of the pandemic. 2021, we went virtual. You can see a picture of it there where we were doing everything on Zoom. It was very successful in some sense, but it was a challenge to keep the student connection or interest up, and it was very difficult to get the students interacting with the professionals, which is one of the features of the approach. In the tribal colleges in 2020, we tried to go virtual. We did go virtual. The big issue in the tribal areas, as Lily was indicating, because they're rural, was connectivity to the internet, and we just had no end of trouble trying to keep those connections going, to the point that in 2021 we postponed it, and we're going to be running this in the fall of 2022. Lessons learned: hybrid programming less popular, impactful with student participants, and then in internet connectivity, particularly in the tribal areas, was really a challenge. The positive, we had a revision of the scholars curriculum to include several new sessions, and I think we learned a lot in how to run it remotely. So one of the questions we always had is, as you can see from this picture, we're always in person, but is there a way to scale it so the people that aren't in person can still benefit from some of the lessons that we're giving? And I think we have a better feeling for how to do that now. And I think Steve sort of indicated that in his talk, that we're going to have the ability to do some hybrid things. And I think we see some potential there for that. It was a tough learning lesson, though, I will say that. Another program that we ran during the pandemic was the Sovereign Native Youth Leadership Academy. Traditionally, it was a week-long residential program, so on campus, for grades 9 to 12 with a focus on Native American students. We developed in partnership with the Nebraska Commission on Indian Affairs. The goal, again, was to encourage Native American students to consider careers in STEM fields. Native American leadership. So almost everything we do, when I talk about Native American initiatives in this talk, almost without exception, everyone running the program, or the vast majority of people involved in the program, are Native American. Same when we're working with our African American partners. We want a large presence on African Americans on the leadership program of those activities. The programming considers workshops, panels, site tours, and lots of hands-on activities. As you can imagine, very difficult to do online. And so in 2020, we tried to run it virtually. Again, we had connectivity issues. It was really difficult to be connected with the students when you're having connectivity issues and you're far away from them. So in 2021, we just canceled it, postponed it. In 2022, we're going to be offering it very soon, the next month. And we have, the nice thing is we have actually more enrollment than we ever had. So there's a lot of desire to get back into doing these types of things. So lessons learned on that program. Again, as Lily indicated, as others indicated, if you don't have internet connectivity, very difficult to run these. The coordination from the virtual program was very challenging. The positive was the participating teachers maintained interest, and they've recruited a record number of students for 2022. So the teachers really wanted this. It was just very difficult to run, but now that we're back in person, they're very excited, and a lot of interest from campus partners. In terms of the Alabama, I want to talk just briefly a couple things. We're home to the Alabama Technical Assistance Program. They had very little experience in providing online virtual courses, similar to many LTAPs in the Southeast. They adopted a virtual program during the pandemic. You know, some LTAPs did, some didn't. Alabama went almost all virtual. They was very popularly received. We've increased the flexibility in scheduling, decreased in cost, facilities, course expenses. A lot of the people who took the courses were very happy with the convenience, sort of what Steve was indicating. You know, less time commitment, less cost of travel. They could learn on their own. So it was very advantageous. So going forward, similar to what everyone else has been talking about, we really see it as a combination of approaches, and really is going to be a function of the stakeholders' needs. If we need to offer the courses in person, we'll be in person. If we need to offer the courses remotely or asynchronously, we'll do that. Auburn's also home to the Alabama Transportation Conference. They've been hosted since 1958. Typically, we get about 1,000 attendees. In 2020, we went in person. 2021 was virtual, and then 2022, we went back in person. The lessons learned, as you'd expect, the cost decreased. It was very much cheaper to run the program, but the survey and the feedback was that it was a clear preference by participants for the in-person meeting. And I think some of the other speakers have talked about that, right? We sort of have a human, we have a human element to everything we do, and having a personal touch is kind of critical. So in summary, in general, general lesson learned, the older the participants, the less issues, the greater the benefits, right? If you're instructing a graduate student or a working professional, having flexibility in those type of things works really well. When you're talking about middle and high school programs and students, much more challenges. Again, because a lot of our programs relied on personal connection, it's very difficult to get that remotely. The other lesson, the greater the distance, the more rural, the more challenges. Getting connectivity, internet connectivity is very bad in the rural areas across the United States. And we also had issues with, more challenges in Native American programs. Us not being able to get onto the tribal areas, which is understandable. It also was a challenge in trying to get resources to them so they could run the programs themselves. So lessons learned. I think we're going to have more remote and distance approaches in the future as a function of who we're teaching to, of course, and we're going to target the approach to the audience. In terms of acknowledgements, I want to thank Gabriel Bruche, Janet Reno, Alma Alta, who's now Director of Math. So Gabriel runs the MATC programs I talked about, and Janet helps out as the coordinator. Both Janet and Amal are in the audience today, so if you have questions on any of the MATC stuff, I'm sure they'll be happy to talk to you after this presentation. And then from Auburn University, Rod Tarochi, who's director of the ATAP program, and he provided that insight. So thank you all for listening, and I think that's it for the presentation. So thank you, Ian. Hi.
Thank you very much, Larry. So now we have about 40 minutes of time. Let's open up for questions. If there's no question from, Melissa, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question for the gentleman from the University of Washington. I noticed some of the people in the room that are still in school or working on their degrees really perked up when you mentioned that you had done away with midterms and finals. And I was curious as to how you assess performance in your students without, how actually you're doing that, especially if a lot of the interaction is online.
That's a good question, but we give them in-class assignments. They have homework assignments. I typically do a weekly quiz, but it's a very low stress weekly quiz. And the design is not necessarily to assess performance, but it's to give the students encouragement to keep up with the material, because it's easy, both online and in person, to check out of a class. you've either done it yourself or you had a friend who said, can I learn a whole semester's worth of chemistry in a weekend? Or should I drop this class, right? We're trying to avoid that. So, and in the end, right, I don't know, the tests don't serve any purpose. Like, it's a high stress environment. It rewards people who are good at school. It disadvantages people who don't take tests well for a variety of reasons. And you know, the knowledge half-life from any class you take in college is something like about 3 years anyway. So you know, even if you remembered everything at the end of the quarter, we teach on quarters, within a couple of years, you've forgotten most anything anyway. So I am very confident in assessing performance and having people go through on assignments themselves.
Maybe I can just follow up, Melissa's question. So certainly evaluating student performance for the on-site courses and online courses, most of us have been using, whatever we did before the pandemic, right? But Steve showed a new style of evaluating student performance. I wonder, through the pandemic, what we have learned, is there a need to change the way we evaluate student performance? Maybe this question is to all the panelists. Adi, you want to go first?
Yeah, I think as a response to Steve's comment, issue I have is whether accreditation will be an issue. If anyone here has gone through ABIT, whether doing this sort of evaluation has caused any problems.
I mean, they don't come through and say, how many of your classes give finals and midterms? And honestly, I get it, right? We all have to be accredited, but they need to keep up with the times, please. Honestly, I mean, ask any student. I mean, I learned a lot from the instructors for my middle school and high school students and how they evaluate them and how successful they are doing that. And I spent an evening talking with my daughter's band director. And at the end of the night, he goes, oh yeah, that's right. I forgot you guys are not trained as teachers. I said, you're damn right we're not. I am learning from you.
Yeah, it's such an intriguing concept, and especially with the pandemic, it's so difficult to supervise students anyway. And anecdotally, I'll tell you that we often have students who have straight A's, but then when it comes time for research, they can't do it. And so we've always been talking internally about what is the best way to actually evaluate students. So at the PhD level, we've kind of switched to more, having them do their own independent research. And so I can really see how it would be so useful to make that pivot in our classes. So that's a great thought. Thank you.
All right, anybody else want to comment?
Yeah, I'll just add a few comments. I think certainly on the grad program, I think almost all of it, at least everyone I know when we were doing the hybrid, got completely away, like Steve was indicating, right? We did projects, we did presentations, we did more oral presentation. The challenge, of course, comes down when you're doing undergrad and you have 100 students in your class, right? I think we all really want to know what a student knows. An oral exam, just asking questions, they'll tell you very quickly if they know the material or they understand what's going on, then they don't. It's just very much a challenge to do that. But I agree with Steve that there's probably ways of doing it that's fairer and more accurate than we do now.
Okay, thanks everyone. All right, so good questions. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
This is Evangelos. I have a question regarding the online courses. How are you doing with the cheating? Because I think it's a big issue when you offer online courses. Everything looks perfect. The faculty stays home or offer the course from the office. The students participate, maybe from the restaurant, maybe from the office, maybe from their room, whatever. But how you are dealing with the cheating? Thank you.
I didn't get the last word. Oh, cheating. I had this question 20 years ago when we started teaching online. Like, how do you know your students aren't cheating and how do you know they're paying attention? And my question back was, how do you know in person your students aren't cheating and they're not paying attention? So to me, the answer is twofold. One is I think students by and large don't cheat and they really want to be there, and the further on in their careers, the more likely that is. And two, assign things that aren't prone to cheating. What is the most prone to cheating thing you can do? A test. Get rid of the test. Give them a homework assignment. They like going through this. Ask any student, undergraduate student, what they love about their department, and they tell you, it's finally, I'm learning things that I wanted to be in school for. I'm not taking calculus, beginning calculus. I'm not taking physics. I'm taking civil engineering courses and things that I'm totally interested in. They go for that. And if you get rid of the cheat, we did that 20 years ago. We said, well, our online program said, oh, we can proctor exams, we can schedule these things. And rather than scheduling proctors all over the world, we just got rid of the final and the midterm. And that was fantastic.
Okay, Adi.
One of the challenges, I agree with you. I think that is definitely the direction we should pursue. But, the problem we have is, especially in engineering courses, giving a test is an easy way to evaluate a student. Larger, bigger homeworks takes more time for them to be, put together, and then correcting them, evaluating them is another major task. And the problem we have is that you have to convince the faculty that, you got to spend more time. So especially if they are engaged in research, they're teaching 3 courses per year and heavily engaged in research, a lot of other, issues. So it has to start from the faculty, but I agree with the direction that you are pointing to.
Yeah, just to follow up on the comments, I think one of the challenges we have is that technology we have is great. We're showing it all and talking about it, but the students also have technology, right? Right now, they're literally, businesses that rely on where you can type in a question in an exam or on a homework and pay for an answer almost immediately in real time. And I think that's what a lot of the questions come from is, yes, you're doing these things, but how do you know the student isn't buying an answer? I'm not saying that there's a lot doing it, but we know enough that there is. I've had colleagues do it in real time where they put on questions onto exams and they've seen it pop up almost immediately with an answer while watching the thing. So I'm just commenting. I don't have an answer, but I know it's a challenge. This sort of technology is great, but also brings challenges.
Thank you, Larry. So I see Chandra Bhatt has a comment to Steve's point. At UT Austin, we have been discussing this issue within a group of faculty at the university level. This point is, should we necessarily generate a high stress environment for learning to happen, or can we present a low stress environment and enhance learning that actually happens? And following this comment, he also said, another question is this. Mental wellness has been an issue for students and for all of us. How do we balance concepts of empathy, for example, providing them a little more time if they want, but also teach them concepts for accountability? So these are the two comments from Chandra Bhatt. Okay, there's one more question coming up.
Hi, Amanda Collimore, TIDC, University of Maine. I'm curious, Larry, if you were providing professional development opportunities to the K-12 teachers to help them implement the activities.
So that's a great question. When we had set up our program, we've been running things probably for 10 years. We went through a lot. We worked very closely with our College of Education and with the teachers themselves on what would be best, because obviously I'm not Steve was saying he wasn't trained as a teacher. I certainly wasn't trained as a K-12 specialist. And so we had developed not a curriculum, because doing curriculum is very difficult. It was all after hours. And what came back from the what we learned was that we need to do repetitive. So that's why we're in the classroom every week, as opposed to just going in once. Going in once and showing, here's engineering and then leaving doesn't really work well. But going in week after week working with the parents works really well. But in answer to your question, the big thing they were interested in, because they are incredibly underpaid in the US, teachers, was that they wanted to be financially rewarded, and rightly so, for the work. So we made sure that they were financial remuneration for everything they did, whether it was the summer camp or the after school. And the topic of getting professional development hours didn't really come up, but it's an excellent question.
Hi,
Stan.
Stan Caldwell, Carnegie Mellon. One thing that we've found successful was having student, small group presentations for projects. And then so it kind of addresses the issue of, one, they get to formulate the project amongst themselves and address that issue that we heard before of that they want to have more peer interaction. And then two, they have to then present in front of the course, and we actually have peer review. And so the faculty and grad students do the review, but then also all their peers do the review, so that you don't have that extra burden of the extra review of it. And and then three, the kind of they also get the benefit then, especially with engineering students and others, of building that skill of presentation and articulation of concepts. And so it seems like the students like that. It's not an extra burden on the faculty, because they're making class presentations during that finals week time. And so that's been a happy medium for us.
So, hi, this is Hillary Nixon, Minetta Transportation Institute, and I have a quick comment or story and then a question. And the comment is, so I was teaching online before the pandemic, continued teaching. I teach a capstone course in our graduate transportation management. But the thing that we changed was and it's because so many more people became familiar with Zoom and were comfortable with the technology, that we switched to having all of our capstone, the final presentations, much more public, where we could bring in audience members, professionals from all over that would come in and participate. And it was really because they suddenly felt more comfortable with the technology, and everyone can Zoom at this point. So that part was really successful. But we have an interesting question is, our administration at the university has basically said, well, okay, if you taught in person before the pandemic, you now have to go back to teaching in person, even though we put all of these resources into training you and providing guidance on how to teach well online. But their argument has been, well, we have all of these physical resources, these classrooms, these buildings that taxpayers have paid for, we need to use them. And I was like, what are some techniques, responses that we can let our administration know we still value these physical spaces, but maybe there is a value to a hybrid approach?
Okay, so
I just want to comment on that. I think this, at least from my university, the sentiment is that undergraduate education has to be in person, face to face. On the other hand, the direction is towards doing online graduate courses more than before. So I personally, I'm going to be doing my graduate courses online, moving forward. But as you said, they are paying for the space. It's going to be an issue. Justification for maintaining the space is going to be an issue. And our dean recently clearly indicated that, we got to go back to class for undergraduate, courses.
Yeah, I think there's truth to that, right? I mean, when Larry was talking about what he was doing, it struck me very clearly that you have to evaluate why you're doing something, right? In many of those courses, Larry, that you were talking about, the social component is the key piece, right? You're not going to finish a course like that for K through 12 and then say, okay, go out and design an interstate bridge. You're good, right? But the social component is so important. And if that's important, like, you know, undergraduates, the traditional undergraduate that many of us have in mind, right? They come to campus, they want to experience all of that. And they're doing their students full time, so they get their social interaction there. Now, I've taught online for 20 years, and many of those students are older and more established in their careers, so they get interactions in a different spot, and they in the evening they do their online part, and they don't need that. And so I think understanding where a student lies and what their motivation is for being in that course is important. And I wanted to maybe pose a question to all of you too, because I'm curious what you think, but we've had real difficulty in integrating online and in-person, just some online courses and some in-person courses, because we set up all of our online degrees are through our professional education program, which is supposed to be self-sustaining, and our in-person ones are state subsidized. And so just mixing students, or just telling a student, look, you can take the online courses, you can take the in-person courses, whatever, it's really difficult administratively. And we've strung together, and Joe Mahoney is a professor in our department who's done these online programs. He has gone through incredible gymnastics to make it nearly transparent to the student. They can flip or hop between online and in person, and it's not a big deal. But man, administratively, I think my university doesn't want me to ever do it. I mean, do you see similar issues? Or are we close to integrating these where it doesn't matter? Some are in person.
In our university, it's the same course, but different sections. And so that's how they split it. And then the students can pick and choose. So this has not come up as an issue. But going back to the previous question, one thing I wanted to say is that if we require students to be there, but we have the resources and we have the videos, we have everything that we have created for online, that gives us the opportunity to kind of change the structure of the class so that when they are there in person, you have group activities, you have Q&A, you have something more interactive rather than the lecture, because you already have provided that in a video, and they can go and watch it whenever they want.
Larry, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think what Lily's referring to, of course, is flipping the classroom where the students don't get lectured, they come and get work on. That gets the social aspect that Steve was referring to, because that's what this, in my opinion, what the students are missing, right, or have missed by getting around. But it also is good because they can teach themselves, they can work on projects together, problems together. I think I'm hoping we're getting away from the fact that when two students work together on a problem, or three, it's not cheating, right? They're just working together on a problem, and I have colleagues who do that, and that's fine. I think working together is actually what we want them to do. So I think there's challenges. The other challenge that came up when I was hearing Steve talk was, and we're talking about administrators, that the dirty truth on what we're talking about is it's much cheaper to do online stuff, right? But we charge the same rate. And there are schools out there that are switching the way of doing it, where it's actually cheaper to do an online degree than go be in person. And I think that's another challenge as universities and faculty we're going to have, that these schools that are, I don't want to say discounted because they're not, but they're making it cheaper. You come in person, it's X, and if you come online, it's half X. That's going to be a challenge for our administrations. Anyway, those are just some thoughts on what my colleagues were talking about.
Thank you, Larry. And I also like the comment. I think using the online education tools and the platform, we're likely to generate bigger impacts, like a student presentation, reaching to the working professionals and get their feedback. Now is also a good point for us to think about, how our future education look like. So certainly our panelists has already shown a bunch of things, what they consider maybe the advantages we carry into the future. I also consider when we started to use Zoom or other education tools, we're not familiar with that, right? We hated it. But now after we are very familiar with it, and understand all the functions available, we start to use them more and more. So maybe with the time going, we'll see maybe it's a more powerful, hybrid platform coming up that will be supporting us to do whatever we have been doing at a much lower cost. You see, actually today's session is a good example, right? It's very nice, I think our technical support team did a terrific job. Really the discussion is seamless. Yeah, so we still have time for maybe several questions. Do we have more questions?
I just, yeah.
Larry, go ahead.
So I just wanted to add one thing, and I've been meaning to mention it. So I work with a number of tribal colleges, and anecdotally, so what they have told me is that as bad as the pandemic was, it's actually been good for their students because they've gone asynchronous. They're doing the things that Steve talked about, and their students are really benefiting because a lot of them have trouble getting to class. They're working, they have other responsibilities. So having the flexibility to attend school while working around their daily lives has been a real blessing for them. So they're indicating they're not going back, that they're going to go forward with this. And I thought it was interesting because, we're always talking about, one of our goals as CUTC and as university is getting more students from underrepresented groups in. And certainly the ones that are in underserved areas have some challenges. And this may be a way of helping us bridge that gap. And I wanted to add it earlier and I forgot, but I think it sort of goes with what we've been talking about. So I'll let you go to the next question.
Well, I can add to that real quick too. We're trying to implement a Bachelor of Science online. Just the last 2 years, we have a bunch of community colleges that feed into the University of Washington. And that's our thought too. Same thing is locally, can we reach someone who's got to stay home and take care of their mother, brother, and sister, who's not going to move to Seattle and be in person. And, it's right now it's kind of viewed as a technology issue, but we're going to overcome that. And if you look at like Tracy and Genevieve back there, you guys are killing it with the technology and this is seamless. So it's doable.
Thank you. Eric, go ahead.
Hey, Eric Glenn, Virginia Tech. So I just wanted to, I can't sit and talk, I got to stand and talk. So I just wanted to give like a student point of view, because I'm also a master's student as well, and hearing some of the stuff with, fears about cheating or, getting rid of tests, staying in tests, stuff like that. And yeah, because none of my professors are here, I'm able to, so, yeah. So I will say like, one thing that's what I'm kind of hearing is sort of like a fear of like, what if my student is cheating? And like, yeah, I've even seen it where taking tests on Canvas, you can just look at the script, open up the script, turn it off, turn times off, pause it, do whatever you want. You can, so many things to get around stuff, right, with technology. And it's actually more work to cheat. Not saying I am somebody who did that, but more work to do that. I've had, fears we've talked about it and stuff like that. And so I think the biggest thing is trust. Trusting your students, trusting faculty to, do what they're supposed to do. Because at the end of the day, I'm paying for a service and then you're supposed to provide that service. And then you're hoping that, okay, at the end of the day, this is something that you need to get out of it, And so you're going to put in that effort. And so when I've had courses where it was more assessment based, where I know there was 3 big tests, no matter what I did, I had to take those 3 big tests and perform well on it. And so most of it was just checking out until it was test time and just knock those tests out and that was it. Versus courses where there was project-based, where, like I said, I've done it where I was working with my peers, 3 of my peers, we get together through the whole time. I'm getting more out of that than anything. Whereas I'm sitting down and then I'm hearing questions about, okay, professor, what is this test going to be like? How many questions this is going to be? Is there, is this question going to be on there as well? Is it going to be from the book, or we took the test and like, is there going to be a curve because this question wasn't on there when you said it was going to be on there, and you said it this day at this hour that this question was going to be on there and stuff like that. So it gets into that versus when we get into, our projects together or groups together, sessions, and learning about the information together, and then talking about it. And we start talking about the things that we learned and, throwing ideas back and forth off of there and stuff like that. So just wanted to share that. And yeah, that's my 2 cents from student point of view.
Thank you, Eric, for sharing your thoughts. Assad, you have a question? Tracy?
Thank you. I'm Assad Khatak at University of Tennessee. So I guess human progress is based on creativity and coming up with new and original solutions. And we try to do that in the context of our teaching, at least to some extent. And there's a taxonomy called Bloom's taxonomy, which I typically use to teach, like, different levels. Do you have students remember something? Do you try to have them analyze things, evaluate things, and how do you make them more creative? So going forward, what do you think is the, in this new mode of teaching, what is the role of creativity? How much of that can we instill, and how to do that? Will this make us more, like standardizing it would make us perhaps a little less creative, maybe? Or this might be an opportunity to just unleash that creativity even more. But I just want to know what the panel thinks about that.
Thank you, Assad. This is an excellent question. So maybe this can trigger our discussion about envisioning our future education, right? How we advance based on what we have. Anybody want to provide a comment on this?
If I
Ali,
may,
go ahead.
I think, take it one step back, Assad. What I think from what we have experienced, fundamental courses like statics, dynamics, where you could essentially do it online very effectively, efficiently. But as you move forward with more design, where more interaction is creativity, part of it is based on interaction and learning from each other. And I think what we are seeing here, at least from our experience, is for the undergraduate program, the fundamental courses are pretty much going to go online, at some point, maybe 5-6 years from now. But the design courses, even capstone courses, especially where you need to have people sitting, working together, that is something that I think it's up to question, see what happens. Yeah.
Thank you, Ari. Didi, you want to comment on this?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to say about this is, with creativity, the best way to really assess and cultivate is when you have students engaged in problem solving. And there's different ways to do that, online, in person. I don't think that the technology really stops us from exploring that or encouraging students to be creative. If anything, it gives us additional tools and different ways to collaborate, even with people that otherwise we wouldn't be able to if we didn't have the Zoom platform. So I think that, moving forward, and Yinhai asked that earlier, our courses, I think, should really focus more on the problem solving and have students engage with that rather than memorization and your typical type of examination which relies on memory.
Thank you, Didi. Larry, you have something to say also?
Sure, I'll follow up. I think it was a great question. I agree with everything I've heard. The reality is what you've heard from everyone. We're really involved in a human endeavor, right? It's the interaction. You could have a lecture class and have no connectivity, right? Give a lecture, no questions, students roll in. That's an awful way. I think we all could agree on that to get anything through. We can have things in person. My son, who's just graduated computer science, he did his capstone online. He had people, because of the way the pandemic worked, he had people in Vietnam, he had people in China, he had people in the United States, all working together on a capstone. They worked it around it, right? The human endeavor part, where they were working and they were getting very good feedback from the leaders of their team. And so I was impressed with that. I think one thing we always forget about, or I should say I always forget about, I'm not sure if anyone else does, is we have a kind of a different generation now, right? Of the students that we're teaching. They are much more comfortable with technology. They're much more comfortable with these types of things that we're talking about, much more than, for example, I am. And I think, you know, it's how do you get that human endeavor connection in? How do you get that connectivity is much more important than how you're actually doing stuff. At least that's sort of my thought.
Larry, Steve?
Yeah, I love the creative part, and you know, when you have all those fundamentals down, you can get creative, just incredibly technically creative, right? You know, in those capstone courses and things like that. And like the gentleman from Virginia Tech was talking about earlier, what is our students, many of them are just very good at taking classes in academics. So they'll ask what's on the test, what's covered, what's available, and they'll read your rubric and they'll answer your rubric perfectly. But there's a bit of emptiness in that, right? Because there's no creativity. Like we've set up a system where I basically have to tell the student exactly what I want to see, and then they spit it out, and that's awesome. And to build some of that creativity back in, or to build that creativity in, is I think what makes for an interesting project, course, group project, whatever that is, you know. And oftentimes that's making an engineering decisions in the face of imperfect information, or things you're not totally aware of, or something where you have to go outside the class. Like I teach a construction class, and part of it is they have to write a work package for building something like a sidewalk or a retaining wall. And they're like, I don't know how to do it. I'm like, it's okay. You can go ask anybody in the whole world, anybody. And if you don't know anybody, I'll give you some names of some folks that I know how to build the sidewalk. And so they have to go outside of class. And that's a big leap for somebody who has spent the last 2 years in chemistry and physics and math, where everything is contained inside the class. And I'm not dissing any of those subjects. I mean, those are some basic building blocks where we're able to do that. But allowing them to express some of that creativity makes for an interesting class and an engaged student.
So I also want to add my comment to Asad's question. So certainly, I think we're at a critical moment, maybe with all the kind of external factors pushing us for innovations in our education system. Actually, every courses are different, right? Just Steve showed how Julian Yamamura did his materials science class. But we tend to design all the classes in a similar way. But this is supposed to be delivered differently, right? Now with the new technology, maybe it is the time for us to consider how do we design different kind of courses differently. Another thing is we have the new technology. Let's say Zoom meeting is created for remote meetings and for remote education. But interestingly, very recently I have a meeting with several collaborators. We sit by a table, somebody prepared some material, but we don't have a big monitor or projector. And then we say, hey, what about we do a meeting, Zoom meeting? Everybody get Zoom meeting, you can get the PowerPoint shared, show up on your local computer. I think that's a different way of using Zoom. I think in the future education, how do we make a smart use of the available technology? I think that's another thing we need to think about. And the third thing is education is a big market, right? So we certainly get the size big enough to be demanding some particular tool or software. If we make the demand clear, I guess some companies are going to respond in a very specific way. So I see Tom raise the hand. I think we have time only for one more question. So Tom, go ahead.
Thanks, Itai. Just a quick comment. A lot of my work is in professional development and working with adult learners. And the investments we make in the things you're talking about in the technology and in the professional formation of teachers and instructors is going to pay great dividends when we need to serve our student populations after they graduate and come back to us in terms of new skills development, new technology that they're going to be having to work with. So I think it's important to think about what the students are going to be doing after they leave us.
All right. Anybody have any other comments, questions? If not, I see Chandra brought up another online question. I would like to ask a question from a teacher's perspective. we have talked quite a bit about the student perspective. At the end, we engaged a teacher. It is important in education. I do not know about you all, but gosh, I felt so less tired once I got back to in-person teaching. Just the dynamic interaction is something some of us may feed off and get us energized. Do you think we can sustain our usual level of energy when teaching virtually? How do you all pump yourself when teaching virtually? So that's Chandra's question. Maybe a quick answer from our panel. We don't have much time left. Anybody want
Just
to?
a
Yes,
couple
Steve.
of quick comments. You're right, man. Sometimes it's really difficult to pull your energy together when you're sitting in front of a computer screen. Couple of simple techniques. I stood up, I had a wireless headset, and I had a playlist at the beginning of every class. And they were inspirational, fired up playlists. I tried to keep them at least PG rated, but some of the best songs got a few words in there here and there. But you got to keep your energy up, and you have to recognize who you are and what that right mix is for you.
Thank you, Steve. Anybody else?
I got a lot more caffeinated. That always gets me more energized.
All right, so we're getting to the end of the session. I would like to suggest 2 rounds of a big class. One is to our technical support team, making this seamless. And the second round is to our panelists who shared their experience in a nice way. Thank you very much for your attention. This session adjourns. Please come back maybe 20 minutes later, right, David? Yeah, for the session number 4. Thank you.